The courtroom fell silent as Sarah placed the bloodstained badge on the table. Across from her, Jason wouldn't meet her eyes. His hands trembled beneath the desk. "Tell them the truth," she whispered, her voice low enough to cut through the hush. Tom's lawyer smirked. "Truth? That's not what we sell here, detective." The judge's gavel hovered midair, frozen between order and chaos. And in that suspended second, Sarah realized justice had already chosen a side. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me. This is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. Rain had been rehearsing all evening, soft at first, then harder until the city sounded like a panicked heartbeat. Neon signs blurred into watercolor streaks on wet pavement. The supermarket on the corner held its yellow light like a small, stubborn sun, and inside, the hum of refrigerators made the air feel close and private. It was the kind of night that made people keep their heads down and their umbrellas tight like secrets. An off-duty police captain named Sarah Bennett stood under that stubborn yellow light, hands deep in her coat pockets, as if she could tuck the months of tiredness there too. Sarah was tall in a way that made people notice, not because she wanted them to, but because she could not help being present. Her hair was wrapped up in a tight scarf tonight. Her badge was taped under her sweater near her heart, where no one could see it. She moved in short, precise bursts, the careful steps of someone who had spent years learning how to read trouble before it spoke. When she breathed, the air tasted like copper and rain. There was an ache behind her ribs that answered every siren she had ever heard. Lately, the ache has become company. Work had been a tightrope for a year. Budget cuts, stalled investigations, officers she trusted turned quiet in meetings and louder on the radio. The city had begun to feel like a case file that refused to close. Unfinished lines, thin leads, smudges where answers should be. Sarah paused in front of the glass doors and watched a man at the counter rearrange canned soup into a precise pyramid, fingers working like a metronome. She watched because she had to, and because watching gave her something to hold onto besides her own thoughts. It's a small habit for a cop. Catalog the ordinary until it steadies the extraordinary. Two versions of the story sat in her head that night. One was the practical map she'd learned in training. Follow procedure, separate emotion from action, do the jobs that could be proved in court. The other was older, rawer, louder, the version that had led her to the force in the first place. That part of her believed in rescue as a law, in fairness as a muscle you exercised until it didn't fail. They were both true. They were also at war. Inside the store, the smell of bread and bleach mixed, honest and domestic. An elderly woman struggled to reach a jar on a high shelf. A teenage boy with paint on his sneakers argued into a phone about a job. For a brief, quiet minute, the world was only that lived-in human. Then an alarm chirped somewhere overhead, two high notes that threaded through the fluorescent light. People glanced toward the door, then away again. These small alarms always felt larger to Sarah. Habit tightened her shoulders. She walked to the dairy aisle like someone walking into a room to find out what conversation was happening. Her boots left tiny prints on the floor, the only maps of her passage. She did not want to show the badge. Tonight, she wanted to be nobody and everything at once. Ordinary enough to buy milk, careful enough to notice the soul of a place. She picked up a carton, read the label, folded the corners into her palm like a signal. The store manager, a man named Tom, had a face worked by the weather, lines that could have been sympathy or suspicion. Sarah could never tell the difference at a glance. He leaned on the counter when he saw her, the move casual, the eyes cataloging her like a familiar file. "Are you closing soon?" he asked. "Soon," she said. Her voice was even, the kind of evenness that had been earned. "Just grabbing milk." He nodded, then lowered his voice like he was carrying a confidential thing. "Quiet night. You hear about the kid on 5th. Sarah's shoulders lifted a fraction. Information came like rain on this night, small, constant, collecting in puddles that told you which way the current ran. She listened. The more she listened, the more she could arrange the world's noise into lines of meaning. "No," she said. "What happened?" Tom glanced at the aisles like he expected someone listening in the soup cans. "Shoplifting." The girl tried to walk out with a basket of cereal and a jacket. Two men stopped her in front. Cops came. He said the last word like it could be a full stop or a question. Sarah nodded because nodding gave her a way to think without committing. The name of the street, the time, a dozen small details would straighten into a picture if she let them. A shoplifting report was a small thing, on paper, a routine call. But tonight the routine felt like a trapdoor the city had set and was waiting to open. A bell over the door jingled, sharp, punctuation-like. The customer who came in carried a tired posture and a scent of wet soil. He said nothing, just moved toward the back. Sarah felt the invisible web of surveillance tighten. Cameras at the ceiling, a cashier with his gaze, the store's register that logged every crossing of the threshold. People were seen and unseen, recorded and misremembered. She thought about the badge beneath the sweater, the authority folded away like a private tool. It looked small in her hands when she thought about it that way, a personal relic that could be pulled out when the world needed proof. She had earned the stripes in the slow, patient way of someone who stays. She had also lost things along the way: patience, trust, a cousin named Michael, who no one in the department could explain to her anymore. When the fluorescent light buzzed and the rain played a faster rhythm outside, Sarah felt a thin premonition like a cold draft. Life had taught her how to notice these drafts, small mismatches in the ordinary. A hesitation, a glance held too long, the slight tremor in someone's jaw. She had a gift for noticing because her whole life had been tuned to the possibility of being wrong and fixing it. The store's front window fogged where a car passed, and through that fog a patrol car rolled up. Its lights were off, but movement spoke louder than sirens sometimes. Two officers stepped out, boots making their own quiet beats in the wet. They were young enough that their uniforms still sat on them like borrowed things, the edges crisp. One of them barked a greeting to the manager, and the other scanned the room like a careful eye. The compassionate narrator, the inward voice, felt Sarah's chest constrict with an ache that was more than professional. It was personal, the way some nights sank their teeth into her. She remembered a childhood where the family had watched police with complicated love, where badges meant protection and distance. She had carried that love like a rosary, counting on duty to make sense of grief. The impartial observer recorded the facts. A small store, a rain-heavy night, an off-duty captain attempting anonymity, and officers arriving with a purpose that smelled like conflict. It noted the symmetry of the scene, authority entering authority, ordinary life intersecting with law. Sarah folded the milk carton under her arm. She did not want the night to change. But nights change whether we want them to or not, and some changes are irreversible. As she moved toward the register, the narrator with empathy whispered a memory into her mind, a letter she had read 2 weeks ago, folded and anonymous, accusing the department in small, precise lines, hinting at a leak that smelled like betrayal. The letter had arrived when she was already trying to keep a dozen other things from collapsing. It had been easy to set aside. It had been hard to forget. She stepped forward, the bell chiming again, and something in the room tightened like a held breath. The city had been patient, and now it wanted an answer. Sarah's hand brushed the counter, and for a moment her life was a hinge. On one side, the quiet domestic task of buying milk, on the other a night that already smelled of conflict. The rain kept rehearsing, and the lights in the store held their yellow position like a promise that small, clear things could remain true even when everything else blurred. She moved toward the door and toward whatever was coming, feeling the steady, complicated weight of being both an officer and a woman who wanted, simply and dangerously, for things to be right. The bell over the door sounded like a question. It cut through the hum of refrigerators and the soft patter of rain on glass. Sarah felt it the way you feel the floor shift beneath your feet, small, then immediate. She had the milk tucked under her arm and the badge folded in the soft hollow over her heart. For a moment she imagined the night could still be ordinary. A purchase, a quiet walk home, the kettle waiting on her stove. Then the night rearranged itself. Two officers stood by the register. One was the young man who had come in with the tired posture. The other was older, broader, his face set in a shape Sarah had seen in too many department meetings, the look that matched procedure to outcome before the facts had time to speak. They wore their uniforms like armor. Sarah's presence should have read as familiar. A small badge, the posture that comes with years of moving through danger. Instead, she felt the air around them thicken with something unreadable. A woman at the counter, breath short with age, pointed behind Sarah. "She took a coat," she said, voice trembling like a string. The sentence landed like a stone, not because of its proof, but because of how quickly others made space for it. The younger officer moved first, all quick motions and questions that were not kind. He asked for a description, then pivoted like a dog with a bone. He watched Sarah the way a heat-seeking device watches for the thing it wants. Sarah smiled a small, guarded smile. "I bought nothing but milk," she said, and the words felt small in her mouth, as if the supermarket space compressed them. Tom, the manager, looked at her with eyes that flickered between apology and relief. He had told the officers about a girl earlier, the shoplifting, the jacket. His face betrayed him for a second, an almost invisible tightening that read like guilt. Sarah had worked in the city long enough to know the look of someone who thinks they are doing the right thing because they are scared to be wrong. "Ma'am," the older officer said, voice steady, "we have reports of someone left with unpaid items. We're doing routine checks." He used the word routine as if routine was a shield. His hand hovered near his belt, a gesture anchored in training. Sarah felt a wash of heat move through her, and with it came a chapter of memory. The way people had once looked at her when she first applied for the academy, like she was testing the patience of a system that had never intended to include her. She thought about the anonymous letter folded into her locker, the lines that accused and insinuated. She thought of Michael, her cousin, and the sleepless nights that had added weight to her shoulders. Tonight, a small act buying milk had folded into that weight as if it had always belonged. "I'm off duty," she said calmly. "I already paid." She shuffled her receipt toward the counter like a white flag. The younger officer glanced at the paper, then at the jacket the woman described, hung on a rack near the exit. People turned their faces like a tide. The fluorescent light painted everything with a wash of ordinary truth. Then the older officer stepped forward and said, "We need to check your bag." His hand implied a right he did not yet have. The politeness of his tone did not reduce the bluntness of his action. Sarah's heart tightened. Inside her, the empathetic voice reached for understanding, for a bridge that could make the moment smaller. The impartial observer cataloged the next moves with clinical clarity: request, refusal, escalation. "I'm not looking for trouble," Sarah said. Her breath fogged in the space between them. She unbuttoned her coat and offered her bag because no one wanted to watch a captain refuse the basic courtesy and turn duty into spectacle. The younger officer looked at her hands as if expecting the wrong thing to appear. A small crowd had gathered without meaning to. Humans are tendrils drawn to unfolding shapes. The elderly woman who had first pointed out the theft looked like someone waiting for a verdict. Tom's eyes flicked down to the badge doubtfully, then away, the kind of avoidance that reads like a secret. The teenager with paint on his sneakers had stopped arguing into his phone. He watched Sarah with an intensity that was equal parts curiosity and fear. When the officer opened her bag and found only her wallet, a folded scarf, and the usual private scraps of a life, the room exhaled. But then the older officer's glance drifted to where Sarah's badge sat taped under her sweater against her skin. He saw the outline through fabric, a small, heavy fact that did not sit well with him. "Step outside, please," he said. For a moment, Sarah paused, tasting the thin edge of disbelief. "Officer, You'll step outside," he repeated, more firmly, his hand moving to the radio at his shoulder. The radio crackled life and sent a sound like a verdict through the aisle. Someone on the street heard the motion. A door closed softly in a nearby apartment. The rain outside masked the small sounds that had once made the night manageable. Sarah felt something else now, a shift in the room's axis. The empathetic voice wanted to reach for the officer and explain how easily the world misunderstood a woman who carried her badge in private. The impartial observer logged the details. A request to leave, an officer reading a badge outline, Tom's shoulders slumping with the weight of a choice. Outside the store, under the yellow lamp, the patrol car's reflection trembled on the wet pavement. The officers ordered Sarah to place her hands behind her back. The gesture was practiced, a choreography designed to reduce resistance. Sarah complied because she knew the rules, because she had lived by them, because she understood how a refusal could feed a story she had no desire to star in. At the curb, the older officer moved with the bluntness of someone performing his job. He said into his radio that they had a suspect detained. The word suspect in his mouth sounded small and heavy, as if it could shapeshift into something worse. Sarah's pulse thudded a rhythm she had heard before in interrogation rooms, in court corridors, in the hollow space after a funeral. A man paused in his car to watch. The teenager with the paint on his sneakers had followed them out, standing at the glass like someone watching a play he had not bought a ticket for. Tom stayed behind the counter, eyes fixed on the exit as if willing a different ending. Then came a sound that felt wrong, the single, clear knock of a phone on glass. The older officer's phone lit up with a name that made the color drain from Sarah's night. The name was simple, Jason. It belonged to someone she had trusted once, a man in the department who knew the cadence of her voice and the weight of her work. The officer's face shifted for a second, an expression of recognition that slipped into something else, an unreadable calculation. The empathetic voice in Sarah's head answered with a quiet plea, "This is still fixable." The impartial observer noted how the officer's jaw tightened at the name, and how Tom's eyes caught that tightening like light catching on a blade. There was a thin line of betrayal beginning to draw itself. Someone she had believed in, on the other end of that ringtone, and a man at the counter whose relief had an edge to it now. "Is everything all right?" the younger officer asked, turning toward his partner. The older officer swallowed, then nodded, a small lie wearing the shape of a professional mask. "They handcuffed Sarah for the paperwork," the officer said, "because procedure required it." The handcuffs closed around her wrists with a metallic certainty. The click of metal on metal sounded like a sentence. People watched in that public way they do at small sites of drama, eyes bright with distance and hunger. Sarah looked at them, at Tom, at the officers, at the small crowd, and for the first time since she had worn the uniform, she felt like a different kind of evidence, a living contradiction. The warmth under her sweater, where her badge slept, gave her a small, private proof of who she was. It did not change the officer's decision. It did not quiet the ache behind her ribs. The rain continued its rehearsing, and beneath it a current moved. Something in the department, a whisper, a note, a call that had turned a routine night into a pivot. As they led her toward the patrol car, the empathetic voice whispered that betrayal often begins with small acts, an avoided glance, a phone call at the right moment, a manager's choice swayed by fear. The impartial observer cataloged the moment as a turning point. The city had produced its first true fracture in Sarah's ordered world, and the evidence of that fracture was not just the handcuffs, but the way people rearranged their faces to suit a new script. Sarah sat on a plastic bench at the station, the handcuffs gone but the smell of metal still in her clothes. The fluorescent lights hummed an unwelcome song above her. Her badge, once secret under her sweater, now lay on the table between her palms, out in the open like a proposition. She turned it over slowly, as if maybe a different angle would change the facts. Mark, the young officer who had first stepped forward at the store, waited across from her. He kept his posture soft, the way someone tries to show he is not the enemy when a friend is still in front of him. "Captain Bennett," he said, and the title sounded both respectful and unsure. "We were told to follow the procedure." "You always follow procedure," Sarah said. Her voice was quieter than she meant it to be. "When does procedure become a weapon, Mark?" He looked away. I followed the call." He rubbed his hands together, nervous. You should have seen the way people were looking, Captain. The manager was sure. We had to do something. You had to do something, she repeated. But you didn't have to be certain you were right. She measured him with eyes that had learned how to read hesitation. You could have stepped back, asked questions. Mark's jaw worked. They told us suspects were detained. We called it in. Harris was the one who, he stopped as if the name was a stone he did not want to sling. Mark was young enough to still hope the world could be fixed by doing the right thing. He wanted to believe his choices were clean. Harris, the older officer, kept his gaze trained on the paperwork. He had the look of a man who had been doing his job long enough to have the relief of practice. When he spoke, his voice had the gravel of authority. We were responding as trained. There was a report. There was a jacket. We had to be thorough. You were thorough by arresting a captain, Sarah said. You were thorough by applauding the manager's certainty. Her hands tightened around the badge until the metal pressed into her skin. How many times have you seen someone assumed guilty and nobody asked why? Harris watched her with an unreadable face. In my years, I have seen assumptions made on both sides, Captain. We don't get to pick which ones we act on. There was silence that the station filled with its own small noises. The printer's quiet were the distant radio, the footsteps of someone who did not want to be noticed. In the corner, a coffee machine coughed and spat. Sarah thought of how often the department's heart beat loudly in small rooms like this, then slowed when asked to explain itself. When Mark left, he walked like a man carrying a question he could not yet place. Sarah watched him go and felt a strange protectiveness for him that hurt. He had done what he was told, and perhaps that was all he could do until he learned better. Later, she found Jason standing by the window as if he had been waiting a long time. He had the easy look of a man who thought people owed him answers. His hair was the same shade of brown as it had been when they first trained together. His smile practiced into a shape people trusted. "You look tired," he said. "I am tired," she answered. "Why did you call Harris?" He leaned against the window frame, arms crossed. "I didn't call him to arrest you," he said. "I called because someone reported a disturbance, and he was closest. You know how calls get labeled." Sarah's eyes searched for him. "Jason, your name came up on Harris's phone." He lit up when he saw it. "That's not a coincidence." Jason's jaw tightened. For a sliver of a second, a woman Sarah had once loved had been visible in his face, the friend who helped her through late-night debriefs, who brought her coffee when she worked a case into dawn. But now there was something else, a man who knew how to position himself in a department that could cut either way. "I don't want to be the story tonight," Jason said slowly. "You know, I didn't set this up." "Someone did," she said. "Someone gave them reason to act." Tom at the store was too quick to point. He looked like a relieved man. She thought of his face, the way fear had made him choose a simple, safe story. "People make choices when they are scared, Jason. You know that." He blinked. "Tom is in a bind," he said, surprising her. "Word is he borrowed money from someone not nice. He's been nervous for weeks." Sarah felt a flicker of something like pity, and then a colder thought. If he's in debt, why point at me? Maybe he panicked. Jason's hands found the window's edge. Maybe he thought pointing at you would make him safer. Maybe he thought if he helped the cops, they'd help him. "You think our officers trade favors like that?" Sarah's voice shook. Not from anger alone, but from the slow coming together of a possibility she did not yet want to face. "You think the department can be bought with fear?" Jason hesitated. "I think people make choices," he said. "I think sometimes they choose themselves." The words hung like a thin fog between them. Sarah thought of the anonymous letter folded into her locker, the accusation about a leak, and the slow erosion of trust that had started when she first took the badge. It was one thing to fight crime. It was another to find the enemy wearing the same uniform. At home that night, Michael called. He was her cousin, and the memory of him was the softest thing she carried. A boy who had scraped his knees and still kept his laugh. Now his voice held something else, worry threaded with a hint of anger. "They say you were arrested," he said. "Is that true?" "It's true they detained me," she said. "It's true people put me in a story that wasn't mine." "Why are you asking?" "There's talk," he said. "Talk that you were involved with people in the East End." People are saying things, Sarah. Mom is upset. I'm upset. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. People talk when they want to fill silence, Michael. What's this about the East End? He hesitated. You used to go there more when you were younger, he said. People think you kept secrets. The thought hit harder than she expected. Secrets could be simple things, an old friendship, a debt repaid. But rumors had a way of baking themselves into truth. I went to help people, she said. I did what I thought was right. Some people don't like what you call help, Michael replied. They call it interference. Sarah felt the walls of the night press closer. I never meant to hurt anyone, she said. I've always tried to do the right thing, Michael. Her voice broke like thin ice. You still might, he said softly. Just be careful. The call ended on a note that left a hollow space. She sat in the dim kitchen with the kettle unheated and felt the weight of being misunderstood. The betrayal she feared now had faces, a manager under pressure, officers who would rather close a case than question a report, a cousin who echoed the town's whispers. Each hand that pulled away left a bruise. In the days that followed, Sarah watched the department as if it were a body she once trusted. Some parts still worked as she remembered, colleagues who stayed late to log evidence, captains who mentored new officers. Other parts looked foreign, whispers at coffee machines, closed-door meetings where people shifted when her name was mentioned. A small twist came when footage from the store went missing. The camera that should have recorded the moment the manager claimed the girl walked out with a jacket had a 10-minute gap. The tech who checked it, Lena, a quiet woman with steady hands, looked at Sarah with a face that had the shape of concern. That's not normal, Lena said. Either someone edited it, or it malfunctioned right when it mattered. Who has access? Sarah asked. Only a few, Lena said. The manager gives the files to us. We archive them. If someone wanted to hide something, they could. The gap in the footage was a small crack that let light through. It suggested someone had been careful and someone had been careless. Either way, it meant the night had been manipulated. Sarah felt the current of betrayal deepen. The department had always been a place of loyalties, but now those loyalties shifted like sand. She made a choice then that felt less like strategy and more like survival. She would talk to Lena. She would track the manager's movements. She would find the missing footage. She would not let a small act, a reported theft, a frightened manager, become the story that took her career and her name. But as Sarah began to move, she also felt the first real sting of doubt. What if the betrayal wasn't just one person? What if it was a pattern threaded through the department, through people she had once trusted? The thought crawled in like cold rain. Somewhere inside, it whispered that truth often lives in the holes left by missing footage and the spaces between people's words. And so the work grew from law into something else, something that asked her to test the people closest to her, to question friends and family, to open doors that had always been closed. The rising action felt less like a case file and more like a reckoning. Lena's message arrived like a cold window opening in the middle of summer, sudden, unwanted, impossible to ignore. The subject line was short, footage metadata. The file she sent was small, but what it contained felt heavy in Sarah's hands. A log of every export and modification tied to the store's camera files. The list showed times, user IDs, and the machine that accessed the archive. One entry had no place it should have come from. One entry had her friend's name. Jason's badge number appeared in the log. She read it 3 times, as if repetition could soften the proof. Every time the numbers rearranged into the same unbearable truth. The footage gap, the 10 minutes the store's camera had been blind, had not been a malfunction. It had been edited, exported, scrubbed, and then returned. The computer that had touched the files carried a department signature. The terminal in evidence control logged in under Jason's credentials. The timestamp matched the night Sarah was detained. Her first sensation was disbelief, that raw split second where your mind refuses to let the world tilt. The second was a physical hollow that spread from her chest outward, precise and sharp as an incision. She imagined Jason at the window earlier, pretending to wait. She remembered the slack in his smile when Harris's name lit up on the older officer's phone. She remembered how easily she had given him coffee and confidence. He was the kind of person who had taught her to find small mercies in a heavy job. Now the log said otherwise. She didn't call him. She walked to his desk instead, the badge still heavy in her pocket, like an accusation. He looked up when she entered the small, cramped office, the sunlight catching the tired line of his jaw. For a moment, he was simply Jason, the man who brought her files, the one who had leaned across station counters to hand her a smoking mug. Then he saw the look on her face, and something like guilt flickered through him. "Sarah," he said, and the name sounded small in his mouth, as if he was testing weight. "You have 10 minutes," she said. She put the printout on the desk between them. "Explain." He read it too quickly, fingers skimming the paper, like someone trying to find the polite paragraph. His face drained. He rubbed his temples. "I can explain." "Start," she said. He took a breath like a man steadying himself for a fall. "Tom was an informant," he said. The words came out slow, like stones rolled down a hill. "He called me. He said someone was after him. He was scared, Sarah." "So you edited the footage?" she asked. Her voice had a hard edge now, a glacier that had been moving unnoticed for a long time. "No," his hands lifted, helpless. "I exported it. I meant to flag it. The idea was to protect him, to remove the part that showed how the jacket was placed back on the rack." He swallowed. "There's a network, Sarah. Low level. People who pay to keep quiet. Tom was in it because he made a bad gamble. I thought, if he cooperated, I could protect him. If I could make the evidence messy, we could control how the story ran." "You thought tampering with evidence and leaving me vulnerable was protection?" The words ripped out of her. She felt cold and furious at once. "You made me the sacrificial part of your plan." Jason flinched as if the word sacrificial struck him. "I never meant for Harris to arrest you," he said. "I called because I thought if we got Tom to safety, the story would stop. I didn't want you to investigate that ring. I didn't want you poking into something that could blow up everything." His hands trembled. "People I care about are on the line, Sarah. I thought I could contain it." "You contain me instead," she said. She saw then the small human details. His fingers stained with coffee, the crease at the corner of his eyes where he'd smiled too often to hide worry, the fold of his shoulders that had always seemed like home. Betrayal looked different up close. It was not always loud. Sometimes it was a small, rationalized choice that twisted into catastrophe. "You could have told me," she whispered. "You could have come to me. Jason, I would have helped. We could have handled it together. We've always handled things together." His silence was the answer. He looked like a man who had been stripped down to his raw self without warning. "I was afraid," he admitted, "afraid of losing what I had built, afraid of being judged. I thought if I kept Tom in my pocket, I could control him. I thought I could keep everyone safe." "You kept him safe by making me a target," she said. The taste of betrayal was metallic, sudden. "That's not protection. That's cowardice in a uniform." He reached for her hand across the desk with a clumsy tenderness, as if connection could edit the damage done. "I'm sorry," he said. "I am so sorry, Sarah. I didn't think." "You didn't think about me," she finished. The statement was a blade and a plea at once. She had relied on him, not only for work, but for the small mercies of friendship, the kind that let you sleep some nights. He had traded that comfort for a fragile arrangement meant to hide fear. "And if I had told you," he asked, "if I'd said Tom was in trouble and I wanted to help him, would you have helped?" The question had the quality of both accusation and desperate hope. She considered the answer the way a jury considers a verdict. "Yes," she said finally, "I would have, but you didn't give me the chance." Jason sank back into his chair, as if his legs had been cut from under him. Outside the window, a siren wailed somewhere else in the city, a reminder that danger had many voices. "There's more," he said after a long minute. "People have been passing info to people outside the department. It's small now, but it's there. Tom owed money. He paid by giving names. He thought giving me his file would buy him safety. Who else knows?" Sarah asked. Jason's eyes shifted away. "A handful," he admitted. "A few techs, someone in evidence, maybe two who run the informant lists. I thought I could keep it clean." I was already in too deep. The admission widened the fracture. It meant Sarah was not simply fighting a mistaken arrest or a careless manager. She was up against a network that used both fear and favors to bend facts. It meant her own department might be complicit intentionally or through negligence. It meant she could not trust the logs she'd spent years learning to read. Betrayal is stranger than fiction because it does not always come with drums and villainous grins. It sometimes arrives as a slow, soft erosion, a friend's rationalization, a colleague's whispered bargain, a manager's need to survive. Jason's confession felt like the opening of a door into a room filled with more doors. Each opened room might hold more complicity or something worse. You should have come to me, Sarah said again, quieter now. The fury had burned out into a cold, aching grief. You broke something I didn't know I'd lent you. I know, he said. His voice was broken in the way that means he'd finally stopped pretending. I'll fix it. I'll tell Harris. I'll hand over the logs. You'll try to fix what you helped break, she said. You'll do the work you should have done in the first place. Her gaze held him, not in triumph, but in a tired demand for responsibility. And you'll answer for it. So will Tom. He looked at her with that small, pleading hope again. Will you help me make it right? She regarded him as if he were both a patient and a case file. There was a long list of things she could do: pull extra logs, talk to Lena, subpoena backups, but there was also a deep personal fissure that would not be fixed with documents. I'll do the work, she said finally, but trust isn't something you hand back like evidence. You have to earn it. He nodded, the slow motion of a man understanding his sentence. I will, he said. Outside, the city continued. Rain washed past streetlights, the world unaware that a friendship had been rearranged into something fragile. Inside, Sarah folded the paper and placed it in her pocket. The twist had opened a new map, one with paths that circled back through people she once loved. The deeper truth made the fight sharper. She was not only defending her reputation, she was untangling a web in which even kindness could be currency. The station felt smaller now, as if the walls had leaned in to hear secrets. Sarah walked its corridors with a new weight in her step. Every door she passed could open into an ally or enemy. The badge at her hip was no longer a shield, so much as a signal flare, visible, exposed, and asking questions no one wanted to answer. People greeted her with the soft distance of those who believe truth is negotiable. Conversations stopped, resumed, stuttered. She heard her name like a rumor, and rumors make the ground unstable. Inside her head, two voices argued, and both were loud enough to drown out the hum of the fluorescent lights. The empathetic voice reached for small comforts. The way Jason had once been her anchor, the memory of Michael's laugh, Lena's quiet competence. It wanted to hold onto those hands that had steadied her. The impartial voice cataloged facts with a clinical, unmoved clarity. Metadata that placed Jason at the terminal, missing footage, a manager with debts, and now whispers of more hands in the ring. Facts did not care about hurt. They asked only for work. She decided to move as facts demand, methodically, with a list. She started with evidence backups. Lena helped, fingers sure on a keyboard, her eyes not flinching when Sarah looked at the gaps. We can try to reconstruct, Lena said. Sometimes deleted files leave traces. Sometimes someone made an export and left fingerprints in the system. They left fingerprints, Sarah said. But fingerprints aren't always people. They are choices. They worked through the night, coffee cooling in paper cups. The reconstruction turned up fragments, frame edges, logs with partial entries, a shadow that might have been a hand returning a jacket. Nothing absolute. The city was giving them riddles, and riddles were a slow sort of violence. While Lena combed the data, Sarah went to see Tom. She found him in the back room of the store, counting coins like prayer beads. He looked smaller than the night he had stood behind the counter. The lines in his face were deeper. Fear had hollowed his cheeks. Why point at me? Sarah asked as she sat across from him. Her voice was softer than the question warranted. She had learned over years that anger got you answers, but softness sometimes got you truths. Tom's hands trembled. I panicked, he said. I saw two men in the shop earlier. They paid cash for something expensive. Later, I found a note. I thought, if I helped the cops, they'd leave me alone. I didn't mean to. His sentence dissolved into a ragged sound that could be apology or surrender. You gave their note to Jason? She asked. He nodded. I handed him what I had. He told me to trust him. Trust, Sarah thought, is a fragile currency. She could feel the cost of its spread. Tom's fear had been real. It had been raw. It had been a lever pressed on people who had nowhere else to go. But his choice had real consequences. He had let fear name someone else's guilt. When Sarah left the store, she felt the night sharpen around her. Fear could bend people into betraying themselves. She felt the line grow. Not only a network of bribes and favors, but a city whose small economies of fear made scapegoats easy. Her choices were no longer solitary. They were entangled with other people's survival. At the same time, the department's internal pressure mounted. Captain Alvarez called a closed meeting. The conference room smelled of stale breath and ambition. People sat like statues in rows, their faces rehearsed into impassivity. Alvarez's voice held the metallic ring of someone balancing politics and procedure. We need to control this, he said. Public trust is fragile. We will cooperate fully with any internal review, but we must also protect our officers. This department cannot look like chaos. Sarah felt those words as threat and bomb both. Protecting officers was necessary. Protecting wrongdoers under the same cloak was not. The room folded around the unspoken idea that image sometimes outranked truth. She watched Jason in the circle of faces. He tried to meet her eyes and then dropped them. A man carrying a secret he had opened. That night, after the meeting, Mark found her leaning against the building's outer wall, the rain having stopped to avoid making a decision. Captain, he said quietly, people are saying you're stirring things up. They say you're making allegations without proof. I'm trying to find proof, she answered, and I'm trying to find the truth. Which one threatens us more? He hesitated. Both, maybe. You have to choose which side you're on, Mark, she said. It's clearer than you think. Mark looked like a boy who wanted to be both brave and safe. I don't know how to choose without losing something. His voice was a thin thing. You won't be the first to be caught between, Sarah said. You might be the one who learns to be brave anyway. Outside, the city kept its quiet crimes and secret economies. Inside, Sarah mapped alliances and fissures. She followed ledger lines into places that smelled like compromise. A bartender in the East End knew a courier. The courier had been seen with cash near Tom's shop. Small links knit together into something slower and meaner than a single bad choice. Then Lena found an unexpected file, an encrypted folder on a backup server labeled with a name that made Sarah's breath hitch. The folder's permissions were set to allow only a few users, the manager, Jason's badge, and one more, Harris. The older officer's name sat there in a list like a coin that had been flipped and landed wrong. She felt the world tilt again. Harris had been the one on scene that night. Harris had the easy answer and the practiced look. If his name touched the logs in evidence control, the problem had more teeth than she'd allowed herself to imagine. The impartial voice cataloged, camera edits by Jason's credentials, exports on Harris's permissions, a manager's fear used as fodder. The empathetic voice wrapped its arms around betrayal, naming it for what it was. Not merely a mistake, but a stitch in a garment being tailored to hide something bigger. She confronted Harris in the squad room, and he met her with the kind of reserve a man learns when he wants questions to die. You're making accusations, he said. I'm asking for answers, she said. Why are your permissions attached to an encrypted folder with edits on the night I was detained? Harris blinked, and his mouth tightened. For a second, the practiced mask slipped, and she saw a flash of calculation, fear bending to decision. Permissions can be used by administrators, he said. Someone could have used my ID. Someone used your ID, she echoed. Someone used you as cover. Are you telling me you had no idea? His silence said more than any crafted denials. The room hummed with the weight of it. If Harris had been used, if his authority had been borrowed, then the corruption was not simply about favors. It was about power masking itself with the uniforms it wore. The choices layered: expose the network and risk the department's reputation, or bury it and let a city's small economies of fear keep buying silence. Sarah felt the scale tip toward dangerous clarity. The empathetic voice clung to human rescue. She could bring people in, protect those who confessed, fix what fear had broken. The impartial voice marked consequences: careers, pensions, and the legalities that would devour sloppy truths. She began to move through both worlds, softly with the people who needed help, rigorously with the data and paperwork. Her search became both a moral march and a tactical investigation. She had to be brave enough for both. And underneath it all, a quieter terror grew. What if the betrayal reached into corners she could not see? What if confession led to more loss? What if asking for the truth cost the people she loved the most? The questions percolated like a slow poison, necessary, terrible, real. As the night crept on, Sarah understood the shape of the coming fight. It would not be a single battle. It would be a series of choices where each answer opened more doors. She would need allies who could withstand storms, and she would need to be ready to stand alone when they could not. She pinched the bridge of her nose and let out a breath. The city carried on, indifferent. Inside her, the two voices reached an uneasy truces: do the work, feel the pain, demand the truth. The rest would have to follow. The room smelled like old coffee and paper, things that had been trusted for a long time. People sat around the long table like actors waiting for a cue. Fluorescent lights made the sheen on the conference table look like water. Sarah stood at the end of the table with a laptop open, the screen bright against her hands. Her palms were steady now. Something inside her had stopped shaking and started working. She began without drama. Lena, beside her, fed the reconstructed frames to the screen. Tiny images flickered, shadows, the edge of a jacket, a man's hand that might have been Tom's. The footage was grainy and partial, but under it ran the metadata Lena had pulled: IP addresses, export timestamps, and a chain of permissions that threaded like a rope through the department. Each name is a knot. Jason, evidence controlled terminal, Harris's badge, and then, like a place where the rope was anchored, Captain Alvarez's administrative token. Murmurs rose like a wind. Captain Alvarez's face, when he saw his token on the list, was a practiced calm that did not reach his eyes. He looked older suddenly, the way a mask looks older when the smile is removed. "This is manipulation," he said, voice smooth. "A private attack on my credibility." "This is a record," Sarah said. Her voice held what it needed: authority and a wearied truth. She clicked, and the chain opened like a door. The logs showed a handoff, an administrative override that could only be given by someone with high clearance. Alvarez had given the clearance, the logs said, or someone had used his authority. Harris's jaw tightened. He started to speak, to place the blame on technology, on ghosts. Jason's lips were white. For breath, Sarah watched him like a hawk watches a small animal it has once loved. He had confessed to her earlier. He had tried to shield Tom. But now the scope of the shield was wider than he'd said. It reached up. "You authorize this?" Sarah asked Alvarez, simple and sharp. Alvarez's reply was the sort a man practices in mirrors. "I signed off on certain protections for informants. We have to manage sources. We don't throw them to the wolves." "That's not what happened," Sarah said. "You didn't protect an informant. You let evidence be altered so a captain could be humiliated and a network could stay hidden. That's not protection, that's corruption." The room changed. Faces shifted. Some looked appalled. Others looked like people who had spent a career learning how to look away. Mark stood rigid near the doorway, the young officer who had once been unsure. He swallowed and then stepped forward. "I can testify," he said. "I saw the export in the log. I saw the call go through." Jason's hands found the edge of the table and gripped it like a man clinging to the last bit of himself. He looked at Sarah and then at Alvarez. "I did it," he said, voice small but steady. "I exported the footage. I thought it would protect Tom. I thought I could control it. I didn't know the override would be given. I didn't know it would be used to make an arrest." Alvarez's lips flattened. "You used my name without permission," he said. You betrayed our chain of command. Jason shook his head. You didn't give my name. You gave the override. The logs show your token at 2214. Whoever used it acted as if they were you. A silence heavy as gravestones fell. It was the kind of silence that forces you to listen to your own blood. Sarah put a hand on the laptop as if to steady it, as if touching the machine could steady the world. Tom's voice came after a long time. I panicked, he said quietly. I thought pointing at someone would make me invisible. I thought if I helped, they'd leave me alone. He looked small and real in that confession. I didn't mean for Sarah to be taken. I just wanted to be safe. Lena tapped the keyboard and a new line scrolled up, an IP address traced back not just to any terminal, but to an off-site machine registered to a shell company that handled payments for certain city contractors. The address was a thread that led outside the station to people who bought silence and traded favors. The more they followed it, the more the net wrapped around the same names. Alvarez stood like a man who could no longer find comfortable ground. He reached for his phone with a hand that trembled. You have no proof this was me, he said. We have your token in the log, Sarah answered. We have exports that show the permissions being used. We have payments traced to accounts that took information from the station. That's proof. And more than that, we have testimony. Harris, who had been still as stone, suddenly moved. His face was a map of decisions. I followed orders that night, he said. I acted on the basis of the report we had, but I did not know the extent of the edits. I did not know the source of the override. You used my name to authorize something you didn't understand? Alvarez barked. This is chaos. No, Sarah said. This is accountability. It happened then like a curtain dropping. The internal affairs liaison at the end of the table, a woman with an official steadiness, stood and called for the recording. Her voice carried the kind of authority that does not need to be loud to be final. She ordered Alvarez to step aside pending an investigation. The gesture sounded small, only a step, but it was the sound of a fortress gate opening. In the narrow space between the order and the execution, Jason's shoulders collapsed. He looked like a man who had finally unburdened himself and found there was no simple comfort waiting. I'm sorry, he said again, to Sarah and to the room and to himself. I thought I was protecting people I cared about. I didn't see how many people I'd hurt. Mark touched Sarah's arm. It was a brief, human thing. He had chosen, and the choice had cost him the easy piece of staying quiet. Outside, rain began to fall like punctuation on the windows, and it felt to Sarah like the city accepting that a wound had been cut open so it could heal. Alvarez's resignation was requested by the liaison. It came not as a shout, but as a soft unspooling of power. A badge surrendered, a keycard turned in, a chair left empty. He stepped away with a face that tried to look surprised that the things he'd done in the name of management were now judged by law and decency. The aftermath moved quickly. Internal affairs opened files, prosecutors were notified, backups were secured. People who had been part of the quiet economy of favors found their phones ringing with questions they could not dodge. Tom was taken into custody for questioning about fraud and complicity. Jason was placed on administrative leave, but had the small dignity of having told the truth before someone forced him. Harris was suspended pending review. Lena and Mark were praised quietly by some and watched closely by others. Sarah sat in the quiet that followed, like someone who had run a long distance and no longer felt the wind. The world had shifted under her feet. She had forced it to show its seams. She had lost things, trust, simple friendships, but she had also pried open a space where truth could be demanded. The cost was not small. The cost would be paid in hearings, in paper, in wounds that would need time to scar. Jason came to her afterwards in the hallway, his eyes red but clear. I want to help fix it, he said. If you'll let me. She looked at him, at the small man who had loved safety over honesty and had watched that choice hurt people he cared about. You will have to do more than say it, she told him. You will have to stay and answer questions. You will have to be the person who shows how to be better. He nodded. I will. Outside, Michael called. He wanted to say he was proud. He wanted to stitch back the fabric of family talk. Sarah told him nothing that night, but listened as he tried to make small talk. In the way he talked, she heard fear and shame for the town's gossip, not maliciousness. She felt compassion for him and for Tom and for the others who had been pushed by fear into dangerous choices. The city would not unknow what had come to light. It would rearrange, leaders would change, some would leave, and some would learn. The network that had used silence for currency would be harder to hide now that light had been pointed at it. But Sarah also knew the work would continue. Rooting out complicity, rebuilding trust, making sure the next time someone bought silence with fear, the station would be ready to refuse the payment. She left the station that night with the rain still soft on her face. Her badge was back on her chest, exposed and heavy. It was no longer something she carried only for the law. It was a symbol of the messy, human thing she had chosen to defend. The city spread out in its small lights and dark alleys, and she felt, against every bruise she had collected, that she was still quietly in the business of trying to do right. The days after the hearings had a light that felt washed clean, as if the city had been rinsed and left to drip. People went about their work with an added care, like gardeners who had pulled out a rotten root and now watched the bed with fresh attention. The station was quieter in the way of a place that had been examined. Conversations were shorter, smiles more honest or more careful. Paperwork multiplied into neat stacks. The press cycles spun their short lives and moved on. Change, Sarah learned, was rarely sudden. It was slow work and slow truth. Tom was charged, Jason was suspended, and then questioned in ways that let him finally explain more than he had in the conference room. Harris was placed on administrative leave, while internal affairs followed the threads to places that paid for silence. Captain Alvarez resigned with a press statement that sounded like regret polished into a useful sentence. Lena and Mark kept working. Lena found new courage in data and quiet competence. Mark, who had once worried he would never know the right thing to do, now stood straighter, answering questions without flinching. The legal system moved at its own pace. Prosecutors read files, subpoenas were issued, and lawyers practiced the gentle art of turning human choices into evidence. Some people would lose careers. Some reputations would be scarred. Others would find ways to return to work with the awkwardness of a public life that had changed. The city would remember the scandal in the way a scar remembers a wound. It would be there, noticeable when the light hit. Sarah found herself called to testify a few weeks later. The courtroom had the institutional chill of places that ask people to explain feelings in exact, limited terms. She sat, badge hidden under her jacket, and answered questions about process and motive and timing. Her voice did not tremble. She had learned a new steadiness in recent days, how to be honest and blunt without being cruel, how to name betrayal without letting it harden her. After the long session of testimony, Jason came to see her in the hallway. He had the small look of someone who had been corrected by life and was trying to learn from the lesson. "I'm going to tell you everything," he said. "No more hiding. I know I have to accept the consequences." "You will," she replied. "You will have to face what you did. You will also have to decide who you want to be after this." His eyes searched her face like someone reading a map. "Will you help me?" he asked, and the question was equal parts plea and promise. She considered him. He had betrayed her trust, yes, deeply, but he had also come clean in a way that cut him open. She had a long list of reasons to walk away and let the law do its work alone. But the world needed repair beyond punishments. It needed men and women who learned and changed. "I'll help in the way I can," she said, "but you must do the rest." He nodded, a small, honest movement. "I will." At home, the kettle boiled like a ritual that had once soothed her. Michael visited more often, bringing food and awkward apologies that were really attempts to stitch the frayed edges of family talk back together. He spoke in a voice that mixed pride and shame, admitting how gossip had frightened him into believing stories rather than asking questions. "We judge too fast," he said one night, stirring sugar into tea. "People are scared and they point at a person who is different. I wish we'd been braver for you." Sarah felt something soften in her chest. The wounds of betrayal had not healed. Some of them would take years and careful tending, but the simple acts of family and honesty were stitches that could hold. She forgave Michael in a small, real way, not by forgetting, but by choosing to keep him close while asking him to be better. In the quiet of her kitchen, she would often take the badge from the drawer and hold it. It was heavier now, with meaning. Sometimes she put it under her pillow, a talisman against helplessness. Sometimes she left it on the table and let the sunlight catch its metal like a promise. The badge did not make her perfect. It was only a symbol of the work she chose, the messy, human work of asking for truth. There were nights when she replayed how easily fear had made Tom lie, how easily loyalty had made Jason hide, how easily authority had been used as a curtain. She felt rage and sorrow in equal measure. Rage at the small economies that traded truth for convenience. Sorrow for people who made bad choices when they were desperate. The moral edges of what she did were not always clean. She could not pretend that firing one person would fix the deeper habits that allowed compromise. She learned that truth required more than exposure. It required reconstruction, new policies, new oversight, and a culture that made it harder to buy silence. She worked to change that culture. She spoke at training about the cost of fear and the value of asking hard questions. She helped craft tighter rules around evidence handling and informant protections, and she supported mental health resources for officers who felt trapped by debt or threats. Her efforts were slow and sometimes met with tired resistance. Old habits are patient, but each small policy that stuck felt like adding a new plank to a bridge that had been brittle. There were personal costs. Some friendships did not mend. There were people who could not bear to be around someone who had exposed the department's soft underbelly. There were colleagues who considered her a traitor to the comfortable order of things. But there were also new allies, quietly given. Lena with her steady hands and clearer voice, Mark with his sharpened courage, and even Jason, who began to show up to meetings with his confession like a hard but honest ledger. Toward the end of the long season, Sarah stood again beneath the yellow light of the same small supermarket. Rain freckled the pavement, softer now. The store looked the same outwardly, but she saw it differently. Inside, Tom's shop had a new manager, a young woman with a businesslike steadiness. The elderly woman who had pointed once at the coat nodded at Sarah as she passed, a small, tentative recognition of a shared city. Life, in its small daily acts, continued. She thought about betrayals, how they come from many sources: fear, greed, weakness, protection. She thought about forgiveness, how it is not a single act, but a practice, born of daily decisions to hold people accountable and also to let them try. She thought about justice, not as revenge, but as repair. There are times, she knew, when justice is simply naming truth and asking for consequences. And there are times when justice is building the structures that make other betrayals harder to commit. On the bus home that night, the city passed by with its ordinary hum. A child in the seat ahead laughed at a cartoon. A man read a newspaper. A woman nodded off against the window. The badge under her jacket warmed slightly with her body heat. She felt the ache behind her ribs again, but it had shape now. It was not only pain, it was memory and armor and a map. She did not pretend the world had become right. The network they had found was only part of a larger problem, but the light they had shown had cut into the dark. People would continue to make bad choices. People would also continue to try to be better. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of small things that tethered her. Michael's laugh, Lena's calm, Mark's steady eyes, Jason's promise to be better. She thought of the many small, ordinary moments that make up a life: a kettle boiling, a call from family, a hand offered in apology. She felt a slow, careful hope, messy and honest, a belief that truth, once chosen, can change the shape of many lives. The rain softened. The city breathed. She opened her eyes and touched the badge through her jacket, feeling its weight and its warmth. She walked forward, not certain of everything, but certain of one thing. She would keep asking questions. She would keep choosing repair. That choice, she knew, was its own kind of courage. So, tell me if you were in his shoes. Mocked and underestimated, would you have revealed your success or walked away in silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that flip the script on arrogance.